Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tiff Talks Tech. I'm very excited today to have my friend Tess Suchoff, who's the VP of Strategic Initiatives at Venn. And today we're going to talk about ways to use data to drive decision making in multifamily. Tess is not from the industry, which I think is very helpful perspective to help us know, okay, what should we be looking at? Maybe there's things that we get so stuck in our ways in multifamily. Sometimes I do. And so I think having the outside perspective is going to be really helpful. But before we dive in, Tess, can you just start by telling us a little bit about you and how you, what your background is and how you got into the multifamily industry?
Yeah, of course. And thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So my background prior to joining Venn this last May has been heavily within specifically the data and tech space, a lot of B2B SaaS, a lot of data related tools, things like that. I was at my last company for 10 years, which is a millennia within the tech space to itself. So definitely have been doing that for quite some time. After 10 plus years, it was time that to start something new and do something where I could be learning again, because I had gotten through enough of like where I think the last I looked at it, I was like the 16th most tenured person within mobile app market intelligence in the world. And so like when you're at that level of how long you've been at a company, maybe start thinking about learning something new. Just as far
Yeah,
as
it's scary though when you've been somewhere for so long to think
yeah.
about going somewhere else. You're like, oh my gosh, how do I even start?
Oh, for sure. And I certainly thought about it. Should I have left earlier, et cetera? But obviously COVID happened and there's some
Yeah,
level of comfort with that. And so everything, ultimately it all worked out the way that it should have. And I'm still an advisor on for that company and things. So all things are positive in that. But funnily enough, one of my past C-suite from that company, Ron Marcus, who is our chief strategy officer then, told me in February that she would love if I would take a look at Venn for helping them out with some strategic initiatives, some data focus, some tech B2B SaaS focus, things like that within the space. And so I started investigating on that and learning more about Venn. And over a couple months, I like to call it more like we were dating rather than necessarily interviewing, because it was both back and forth as far as like getting to know each other and meeting. I went back and forth to New York a few times, and all in all, it's been a really exciting, and I have been very impressed with the industry and how welcoming everyone has been. It's been incredible for that, as well as then just Venn as a company. NAA coined the term Venn vibes, which is ultimately like very much something that it's not quite something you can put your finger on, but there's
yeah,
definitely something there about the people and about what we're focusing on with community and what we're focusing on by leveraging tech and data in order to best serve both on-site and residents and everything there. So that's
yeah.
sort of the elevator pitch version of how I got to multifamily.
That's amazing. Can you, for anybody who may not know, can you share just like the quick elevator pitch of what Venn does?
Yeah, so Venn is an end-to-end ecosystem that lays on top of the property management software and then connects all of your single point solutions together to help with centralization, to give you insights on the data based off of how residents are acting and behaving. And by that I mean behavioral data, not as far as behavior, like a behavior report card or something like that. Point being that gathering all of this data and insight so that you can actually build and create more efficient processes, focus on cost savings, increase revenue, increase the retention of residents, and all sorts of other happy pieces that are driven by the data itself.
That's awesome. So, how do you feel? I know you've worked with a lot of large data sets. How do you feel that journey has helped shape your understanding of leveraging data and making decisions with that data?
So I think that as far as the exposure to it and everything, it's something that certainly is scary to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Because you are overwhelmed by this large amount of information. What do I do with it? Where do I start? It can be a very overwhelming concept, especially for people who aren't necessarily technical. And I regularly will say that I'm technical enough to be dangerous, but not always technical enough to be helpful.
Yeah.
It's certainly one that I keep in my back pocket as far as having those technical conversations with people. As it pertains to the data sets themselves, it's really about understanding and making sure that it's clean, accurate, normalized data so that everything can be sort of built on that. Because if you don't have data that you can trust, you can't trust any decisions that are made based off of that data. So I would say that the biggest piece, regardless of the size of the data set, is really making sure that it's clean, accurate, and normalized.
Yeah, so to that end, how do you make sure that your data is accurate and reliable? What things do you look for?
Having been in multifamily for all of, 3 months, I definitely have heard a few different buzzwords that seem to be like each year there's been a buzzword. So a few years ago it was centralization. Last year I
Mm.
think it was AI. This year it's data. So very focused across those. I would say that these all really align heavily to that, where focusing on the centralization of your data so that everything is in one place and that you can gather it all, A, helps with the normalizing of it so that you're looking at the same definitions of data. Because if you're looking at one definition of a resident versus a different definition of a resident, or where they are in that in the cycle of it, and being able to compare, you're going to not necessarily have the same segmentation for it, and being able to really focus on what is it that I'm trying to put in front of that particular resident. What am I trying to engage with them on? Because if one is already through their move-in process, has already moved in, has been there 6 months, but then you're also messaging someone who is in their move-in checklist and starting to go through that, you're not able to share with them the same sort of information necessarily, because they're at two different stages and the data just doesn't match up as far as that segmentation there. So it's about making sure that you're centralizing it, making sure that you're having these normalized data sets. In fact, there's an example from a previous life that I was working with, and I won't say the company name, but a publicly traded crypto company, that they were going off of a definition from their analytics tool, but we were looking at a different definition within the data set. And so they weren't matching up. And so it took a while to necessarily identify what the sort of conundrum or anomaly was within the data set. But as soon as we figured out that it was really just coming down to what is the data that we're looking at, everything else lined up and fell into place.
That's such a great point. I remember being on the operator side and looking at different pieces and writing down definitions of what the data meant, because I would pull reporting every month and I would kind of piecemeal it all together and I would say this is the same thing as this. And because different platforms have different ways of defining that, and I think that is something when you're going to a partnership with any vendor, you want to make sure, hey, I just want to understand your reporting and the definitions because you want to be able to do that.
100%.
Yeah. So in multifamily, what do you think are some key types of data that we should be focusing on collecting and looking at? I know it probably depends on your role and what you're looking for, but is there anything that you would often look at and found super helpful?
First, and this is me being a data geek, my first thing is to just say anything and everything. All data is helpful at the beginning because you don't necessarily know exactly what's going to be valuable as you continue throughout. But more specifically, if I were to sort of narrow it down, because I know we're all of multifamily has already been gathering demographic type data, so age, gender, location, a lot of the background on their financials, so perhaps what industries they work in, these sorts of things. But going beyond the demographic data, focusing on collecting behavioral data can be very insightful as far as predictive analytics. What does that then tie to? How can you best leverage and understand what they're showing or presenting as far as just their natural experience with you and your brand, and how can you use that? In addition to, I would say there's, if people aren't necessarily familiar with natural language processing, it's a type of AI or augmented analytics where they're training the model in order to understand language. Think of it sort of like ChatGPT, but more gathering information, pulling it out a little bit more on that front. So when you're thinking about it with that, if you're using any sort of content gathering where your residents are writing, whether that be in a resident portal, some sort of social community piece, in their satisfaction surveys, etc., you're able to then use natural language processing in order to pull out more insights, gather intelligence around it, what themes are happening across, what sort of commonalities as far as specific words. And it gets really interesting when the model starts learning sort of the cadence or types of and how the language is being used. So for example, if you were to say, oh, I absolutely hate playing this solitaire game on my phone, I spend all my time doing it. That's actually a positive, even though they
Mm.
said that they hate it,
Yeah.
because they're engaging with it and it's like, oh my gosh, I waste all my time doing it, but I really love this game and I'm really playing it all the time, that sort of thing. So it becomes really interesting when you're using the content as well. From what I have been seeing, the two data sets that I think multifamily can be expanding on would be gathering additional content and communication from your residents, as well as the behavioral data.
Yeah, I've definitely seen platforms that gather that from reviews. I would be curious to see, and I'm sure that they exist, but pulling that from surveys as well and seeing what residents have to say. I always loved the word cloud because you can see like what is most common. It can get a little confusing, but you can see what's most commonly said.
It's the basic understanding of it. And of course, using NLP will then pull out deeper insights across things and training the model that you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are some of the best tools that you use for analyzing data? And is there any way that people can apply those into multifamily? Or is it, you know,
Yeah, yeah, of course. So I would say, and this is going to sound perhaps a little archaic. I'm a huge fan of Excel. So, and to be clear, Excel spreadsheets on Google Docs and stuff is okay. It does not have nearly the amount of functionality that Excel does as far as creating like pivot tables and different graphs and different pieces as far as the data visualization, which of course helps with understanding the data, especially if you're presenting it, all these sorts of pieces. And I would say that that's also Excel is probably the most accessible. There's other things that then require more technical skills like using SQL or Python, being able to start leveraging tools with data visualization like Tableau or Power BI. But then we're starting to get into these sort of bigger pieces, and not to not to just keep going back to talking about Venn, but I think that there's also a lot to be said about the data analysis that Venn is able to show with all of the data that our clients are already collecting about their residents, in addition to what new data points they'll be able to collect through Venn.
yeah, that's really cool. So, I do also want to know with all of your experience, can you share a real world example of where that data has helped companies make decisions and improve things? And maybe having that outside perspective can help us get out of our box of like, okay, I can tell you an example from multifamily all day long, but I'm curious, like something that you've seen.
Yeah, of course. So, real life example, I got an email in August of 2020 from Andreessen Horowitz, which is the giant tech VC out of San Francisco. And they were interested in looking at some of the data that my company had. And at the time, I wasn't quite sure as to why they were being, obviously, it's a little more hush hush NDAs, et cetera, all that. But they've since announced all of the things, so I can talk about this. So at the time, I didn't necessarily know what they were looking for exactly, but started to realize that they were looking at our data in order to help them evaluate and complete due diligence for an investment that they were looking at, which was unique to what we were doing, what we were able to do, because we were able to get data so early about these different applications and things. Do you remember in 2020 when Clubhouse sort of blew up?
Yeah.
So it was Clubhouse where they were looking for information about it, but the thing was that because it had just launched and it also was invite only at the
Yeah.
time and like all these different things, there was very little data about that. So, but we were able to have that data from the way that we were collecting and modeling all the metrics and performance data about applications at the time. And in doing so, they were able to then leverage it in order to drive decision-making power around investing in the company at the time.
Yeah, that's crazy. And it's a perfect example of how when you look at the data, you can start to decide, okay, does this decision make sense for us and all of that. So, what are some best practices that you can think of for integrating that data into the decision making process on different levels? I know that you could do it differently and outside of the industry, but we have, different levels. Like we have regionals, marketers, property managers. It's going to be different for each level.
Of course.
Yeah. But is there anything that you recommend?
What I would immediately suggest as far as getting started is, regardless of the role, have a sense of the types of questions you're looking to answer or a hypothesis that you're trying to prove or disprove unto itself. But as an example, let's say that I'm looking at a property manager or regional manager. They can use the data and indicators to predict likelihood to renew based on variables such as frequency of paying rent on time, the number of maintenance tickets they're submitting, how much engagement are they having in the community, use of their amenities, like all these different pieces, which are the behavioral metrics and data that I was mentioning earlier, all ties into being indicators. And then you can get a sense of what is that likelihood that they're going to renew? How can I ensure that? What can I be doing to engage them more if I see that they've dipped when that sort of likelihood to renew, things like that. So it gives you a roadmap in a sense of what do I need to be doing in order to have the greatest possible outcome for what I'm looking for, in this case, the retention of residents, compared to, say, a marketer who can use all of the data to best engage the residents and identifying it at the best times to be able to send that information out. So, for example, let's say that there's a resident portal that it's gathering all of the written dialogue that they're presenting and posting, whether that be that they're doing it in a community group or in a poll, whatever it may be, and gathering that in order to see, well, they're using extremely positive language. We see that they're really engaging with that. Perhaps we should be sending them a survey now so that we can get a measure of where they're at with and why they're so happy so we can try to maximize on that. Or equally, if you start seeing that they're more on the negative side, being able to start using marketing automation in order to engage them and try to really turn that experience around and make sure that they're getting that high level resident experience that the brands are really focusing on these days.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes you even have to sell that data up the chain of command for people
Hmm.
to make decisions. So I think it's so
Exactly.
important that you fully understand what it's showing so that you can relay that as
Yes.
well.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, the data is only as good as you can communicate it. And so making sure you understand it, making sure you're able to clearly communicate is going to actually be what drives those decisions.
Exactly. Do you see any common challenges that people face when they're first starting to implement those data-driven decision-making processes?
I know I've already talked about normalization, but I really think that that's probably the most common is
Yeah.
that people pull all the data from all of these places and different spreadsheets and different exports from various tools, etc. And now what?
Mm.
Right? And so it becomes really difficult to make sure that everything is aligning, making sure that you're gathering everything so that you can actually do the comparisons, actually see if there's correlations in various places. Also, correlation doesn't mean causation. That's another big one that people seem to be blind to and just immediately be like, oh, they're doing this. That means that this happened. It's like, no, it's a correlation, and that's indicative and insightful for predictive analytics and making predictive insights for the future, but it's not causing it necessarily.
Yeah.
So I would say that the making sure that when you're going into the process, as you're focusing on sort of the implementing these data driven focuses and decision making practices, starting and building a strong foundation for the data so that you can then build on that and gather insights from what you've already set to be that foundation.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I also recommend, like you were saying, so many different definitions are out there. And so, like I was saying, I used to do reporting once a month, and doing it once a month, I wasn't doing it every day. So sometimes I would forget which things were supposed to go together. So, like, make a legend, make some notes. If you need to,
Data
if you find that
glossaries.
happening, you need to just write it down.
Yeah, data glossaries are your friend. It's also really valuable when you're then sending those reports off that you can attach
Mhm.
that as part of it so that whoever's reading it, they can go and look up, oh, what did they mean by this, etc. What is that variable exactly? All these sorts of things.
Exactly. So do you see any trends that are popping up in the field of data analytics in or out of industry?
I mean, it's not a surprise that AI is
Yeah.
one. Keeping in mind, though, that AI is only as good as the data that you have to train the AI because it's it
Especially
only.
with NLP for sure, like, you
Oh
have to
God, yes,
train it.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, with any AI's trained
Yeah.
models, NLP for sure, even more so to a degree because there's all sorts of nuances within language, and which I just find fascinating. And that's a whole
Yeah.
different. I could go on and on about the linguistics of NLP. And that's a whole different podcast.
I'm, like, so intrigued by that. Yeah, because I learn about NLP all the time because I work for a bot company, and so I have to know the difference between NLP, all the different kinds. So yeah, I do wanna talk about that at some
We
point.
can do that. Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I would say AI is definitely a big one in as far as focusing on automating insights generation, anomaly detection, predictive analytics. But one that I would say is probably even more closely specific to the industry is the IoT Internet of Things trends that have been going on for years, specifically for like single family residences and such. For example, I personally have Google Home set up throughout mine, as well as I have an Ecobee, I think it's Ecobee, thermostat that is installed in a Ring camera. You have all of these
Yeah.
different technologies to be able to manage your home. And then the aspect is like, how much of that are you then gathering for data to then be able to drive insights for your company? As an example, when it comes to Ecobee, there's a lot that you can see as far as energy maintenance, sustainability, all these sorts of pieces where you're then using that data. How is energy being used across all of these different units? How is it being used in common spaces? It's really interesting that there's also an aspect of it which is, I think it's called community saving. Ecobee will shift the temperature based off of the increase in electricity usage in the area so that you're like offsetting to a degree within reason, like you set the bottom and top as far as how warm or how cold you want it to be. But there's a lot in this IoT space that I don't think multifamily has even really begun to scratch the surface with.
You're
that
so
I
right,
think
and I think that we could use that as marketing features as well. Like, if you know that you say your property helped save this much, you helped the environment this much, whatever, you can start marketing those, and it may
yeah.
not be the selling point, but it's a benefit that people may like, and maybe it is a selling point, I don't know.
For sure, no, and I know that there are a lot of large, and I'm sure smaller ones too, but large property management companies who are making these promises of becoming carbon neutral by
Mhm.
X date and things like that. So this then can also help with a lot of the things you're working on for those, whether that be inputting EV chargers, whether that be using the thermostat pieces, whether that be any other sorts of amenities that could be tied to it and things like that. So lots
Yeah.
of ways that you can leverage IoT in order to A, improve your bottom line and P&L as far as like utility costs, things like that. But B, being able to improve the resident experience as a whole.
Yeah, I'm thinking of I worked on this project when I was on the operator side. We had a community that was entirely solar powered, and one of the benefits that it had was that it also fed the grid instead of taking from the power grid, it would feed
Amazing.
into it. Yeah,
Yeah,
and so that was something like we marketed, and I think if I had more data around those kind of savings and what we were giving back, I think that would have been really beneficial as well. So I think you're right. We need to dig into that a little bit more. There's something there.
definitely. Happy to talk about that with anyone who wants to talk about
Yeah,
it.
no, I think that's so interesting. Kind of moving along, what is one of the most surprising things and insights that you've found from digging into data coming to the multifamily side?
I was at AIM and was listening. This was literally my fourth day at Venn. So I was there to be a sponge, listen, just learn, meet people, etc. One of the NMHC talks was focusing on tool management and all of the different tech tools that are being used. And I found it just mind blowing that more than 20% of companies in multifamily have more than 31 tools that they're leveraging, which is absurd. Like, just
Yeah,
imagine that's 31 plus logins for any an on-site manager.
yeah,
That's and it's not like you're using Facebook to then log in, where you just use
yeah,
the same like
yeah,
social login piece there, as well as then like the other piece that I found interesting about it was that 44% of those companies, the tech stack management and relationships fall to marketing. So it was interesting just to hear a little bit more that marketing is responsible for a lot of things that perhaps they're still needing to play some catch up on with the technology and education side. And I found that really compelling and interesting, just as far as coming from the data and tech side myself. Like, how can I then best support and educate people so that they can be using this data and these tools to the best of their abilities, even if they're technical enough to be dangerous, but not technical enough to be helpful?
yeah, absolutely. I remember one of the questions I would always ask a vendor is, do I have to have the property sign in? Because there are so many platforms that the properties are responsible for. That's like a full-time job. And then doing your actual job, like it's so much to worry about and to learn. And there's reporting on every single dashboard. There's just so many different aspects that you have to figure out when you're bringing on a new vendor. So yeah, I've definitely seen that and been there, and it's a big undertaking for sure. How do you stay up to date with the latest trends and tools that are out there as far as data analytics?
There's all sorts of different like forums between Reddit. Amazon has all sorts of different tech sort of events and things as well. As far as it pertains specifically to multifamily, I'm still learning. I'm still figuring that
Yeah.
out. So if anyone has ideas around that, I'm always willing to hear it and listen, have that sent over. But the two that I would say I've been focusing on within multifamily have certainly been NMHC's reports and
Mhm.
focusing on a lot of what they're showing and sharing, but also specifically Revise with that from Ben and Bobby Stewart. It's a really insightful and valuable platform that I think is giving a lot of insight and education to the space so that people can go to a agnostics platform and just gather that information more like a syndicated research firm like a Gartner or a Forrester in the space.
Yeah, I did an episode with Ben a little while ago, and if you're not familiar with Revise, I say go listen to it now because there is, I mean, it wasn't meant to be a sales pitch for Revise, but I do think it's such a useful tool for the industry because as a property marketer, you can see more than I would be able to see on the vendor side, and I wished I had it when I was on that side. So you can see like guided tours of products and do a lot more compare and contrast. than I think we've ever been able to do before. So, yeah, that is a great way to stay updated for sure. What are some of the key takeaways that you want our listeners to remember about leveraging data and driving decisions?
Data isn't scary. I know
Yes.
it feels scary. I know that it can be very overwhelming seeing pages and pages of spreadsheets and not knowing where to start, but it truly is the key that unlocks problem solving across all aspects of business and, in my opinion, of life, as far as being able to really understand and drive that understanding for any sort of decision process, any sort of evaluation. Yes, at the end of the day, you should trust your gut, of course. I'm not minimizing the importance of human intuition, but data has gotten a long way and can often support what your gut is saying. So you might as well then use that so that you can have it go up the chain to prove those points just to have more support on your side.
Exactly. I remember when I came on as a baby marketer, I really thought marketing was just making pretty supplies. Like I thought I was just going to be making nice little flyers and whatever. And I didn't realize there was this whole data side to things. And I was not a math girl. In high school and college is not my favorite. But I think diving into data is just so different because, like you're saying, you can use it to support a thought that you have, a theory. And it's not scary as you think it is.
Yes, it's not as scary as you think it is. It, I'm not trying to minimize it, can be overwhelming, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if you sit down and have the questions that you want to try to answer, you have your hypothesis that you're trying to prove, you then are able to start using that as sort of the start button to then launch off and be able to identify a path forward using the data.
Okay, so I have a bonus question. This is something I ask each one of my guests, but does
I
not have to be related to this topic. But is there a tech tool that you yourself are loving and constantly using right now?
mean, AI note takers are kind of a given these days.
That's a good one.
But as
Yeah.
far as I'm trying to think of something specific, are you familiar with the application If This Then That?
No, I've never heard of that.
So if this then that allows for the individual consumer as well as for businesses, it helps with creating automation in your life. So being able to have it so that, for example, I want my AC to be turned on when I'm within this GPS radius of my home as I'm getting back home from wherever. I want for the lights to turn off at this time every night. I want like whatever the pieces may be, as well as it can be. There was one that was kind of funny that you get the NASA space photo of the day sent to you as soon as it's released each day. Like there's endless numbers
That's
of
super
these sort of
cool.
if this and IFTTT. So if this, then that, because
Mm.
it's conditional statements. And it makes it super easy for anyone to really make it work. So like if this occurs, then make sure this happens, and you can really automate a lot in your life.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've never heard of that, but now I'm gonna head straight over and check that out and see how it works.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's super awesome. So, how can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work in multifamily data and all that you do?
Well, you're always welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, Tess Suchoff. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one out there that's Tess Suchoff. So pretty should be pretty easy to find. And also you can shoot me an email at tess@ven.city. And that's Ven with two N's. But yeah, either way, happy to always hop on a call, talk about how you guys are using data today, ways that maybe you weren't thinking, being able to just brainstorm. I always just love networking. So all in all, feel free to reach out at any time, and always happy to chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it so
Thanks,
much.